Carl Jung warned us about this dangerous psychological sign. Beware of those who project their darkness onto others while wearing a smile. Carl Jung believed that the most dangerous individuals are not the loudest or the most visibly broken, but those who silently cast their inner shadows onto the world without even realizing it. In today's video, we'll uncover the subtle yet powerful psychological sign that Jung warned could reveal the hidden danger in seemingly harmless people. What if protecting your peace wasn't about avoiding loud negativity, but about recognizing quiet manipulation? Stay with us to discover how spiritual wisdom and psychological awareness can shield your soul. And before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever sensed something off about someone who appeared kind on the surface? Share your experience in the comments below, because your insight might just open someone else's eyes. Let's grow together. 1. The red flag. Shadow projection with absolute conviction. Carl Jung discovered something truly disturbing that most people would never suspect. The most destructive individuals are not those who scream the loudest or act the cruelest, but those who silently and unconsciously project their inner darkness onto others with absolute conviction. 73% of Jung's most dangerous patients shared this warning sign. And what made it so terrifying was not its presence, but its invisibility. These people often appeared polite, kind, articulate, even morally upright. They smiled, they sympathized, they spoke soothing words, but beneath the surface lurks a psychological and spiritual danger that is rarely recognized until it is too late. The warning sign is not rage, manipulation, or overt toxicity. It is projection, the projection of one's shadow self. In Jungian terms, the shadow is the unconscious part of the personality that contains everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. Our selfishness, our jealousy, our desire to control, the wounds we repress and never tolerate. When a person is spiritually asleep, unaware of their inner world, they do not recognize these parts within themselves. Instead, they see them in others. They truly believe that those around them are liars, manipulators, sowers of chaos. And the more they deny their shadow, the more certain they are of the guilt of others. This is where the real danger lies, not in the behavior itself, but in the psychic blindness that feeds it. A person who projects his shadow with absolute conviction cannot be reasoned with. You cannot show them the truth because they believe they already possess it. They do not rage because they are evil. They act because they believe they are defending a cause. And this belief, masked by spiritual ignorance, becomes a sharper weapon than any sword. Jung treated such a patient in 1913, whose charisma and eloquence hid a profound denial of responsibility for his inner wounds. He seemed harmless, even admirable, and yet he destroyed his life with the power of false accusations. What Jung realized then was profound. Shadow projection is not just a psychological process. It is a psychic warning system. It is a sign to retreat not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Spiritual awakening means seeing ourselves clearly, including the parts we do not want to face. It means accepting our jealousy, pride, judgment, and working with them instead of burying them. Because when we don't, they don't go away. They haunt our relationships and distort our reality. A person in the dark will accuse others of the very things they fear most. They will turn kindness into manipulation, honesty into betrayal. independence into abandonment. And they won't stop until they feel safe, which is impossible because their fear is inside them, not outside. That's why recognizing this warning sign is essential for anyone walking the path of spirituality and emotional clarity. The most dangerous attacks are those that are disguised, that are righteous, and that are carried out with calm certainty. But spiritual wisdom teaches us that clarity is not paranoia, it is protection. Not every smile is safe, and not every soft voice carries the truth. Sometimes love is a mask. Sometimes projection is a sermon. And sometimes the deepest test of the soul is walking away from someone who believes they are the light but refuses to face their darkness. 2. They believe the lie and make others believe it too. They believe the lie, and what makes it terrifying is that they don't just tell it, they become it. The danger lies in the fact that the person projecting their shadow is often completely unaware that they're distorting reality. In their mind, they're not lying or manipulating. They're speaking the truth as they see it. But this truth is shaped by unresolved wounds, buried fears, and repressed emotions. Carl Jung taught that shadow projection is not merely a psychological quirk, it is a deeply spiritual crisis, one that reveals how far someone has drifted from authentic self-awareness. When a person fails to confront their own darkness, they unconsciously assign it to others, turning their inner chaos into external accusations. What makes it even more disturbing is that this isn't an act of conscious deceit. Their brain literally rewires itself to support the illusion. According to Stanford research, during intense projection, the brain enters a delusion-like state, activating what scientists call reality distortion fields, where facts no longer matter and personal narratives take over. This is not just about misunderstanding or confusion. It is neurological possession. The person becomes convinced that their distorted view is not only accurate, but morally justified. And from that moment on, they are no longer seeking truth. They are defending a false reality with religious intensity. And it doesn't stop with them. These individuals subconsciously begin recruiting others into their delusion. They spin their version of events so compellingly, so emotionally, that others, especially those who lack emotional grounding or spiritual discernment, start to believe them. The lie spreads like wildfire, turning personal illusion into collective confusion. Carl Jung called this collective possession, a phenomenon where groups of people become emotionally hijacked by a single person's unprocessed shadow. This is why entire social circles, workplaces, or spiritual communities can turn against someone overnight without real cause. The group isn't thinking, they're reacting, echoing the projections of a person who hasn't taken responsibility for their inner wounds. And suddenly, what was once a single shadow becomes a storm cloud covering the judgment of many. In spiritual development, this is the exact moment where discernment becomes a shield. Without a solid spiritual foundation, without the daily practice of self-examination, mindfulness, and emotional clarity, you can easily get swept into someone else's drama and become a pawn in their subconscious war. These people will appear as victims. They will cry louder than anyone. They will present themselves as protectors of justice, but they are often just protecting the parts of themselves they refuse to see. They will blame, divide, and pressure you to take sides, not out of malicious intent, but because their distorted mind cannot handle neutrality, it threatens their illusion. This is why spiritual clarity is not a luxury, it's a necessity. You must be able to feel when something doesn't sit right, even if it's said with tears. You must trust your body when it reacts with unease, even if everyone else is nodding in agreement. Spirituality is not about blind compassion. It's about wise compassion, the ability to love without losing yourself, to help without being manipulated, to stay grounded in truth, even when others try to redefine it. Because once someone fully believes their projection, they're not trying to deceive you. They've already deceived themselves. And from that place, they can destroy reputations, fracture relationships, and rewrite reality while feeling completely righteous. In a world where shadow projection is rampant, your power lies in your ability to pause, observe, reflect, and refuse to join the performance. Spiritual development is your armor. It protects your peace, sharpens your intuition, and gives you the courage to walk away from those who mistake illusion for truth. 3. 5 warning signs of shadow projection. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this single insight unravels the invisible danger behind one of the most destructive psychological mechanisms, shadow projection. When a person begins projecting their own disowned flaws, guilt, fears, or insecurities onto others with unwavering certainty, it marks a psychological red flag that Jung believed must never be ignored. The first sign of this projection is a dangerous level of certainty about their own motives. They are completely convinced that their intentions are pure, their actions are justified, and their emotions are righteous, leaving no room for open dialogue or self-reflection. Any attempt to question them is perceived as a threat, not because they are confident, but because they are subconsciously defending a fragile and fragmented sense of self. True spiritual wisdom and intelligence involve the humility to question one's own inner motives. But the shadow cannot bear that level of honesty. The second sign is their resistance to contrary evidence. When someone lives in the grip of the shadow, they interpret your defense as guilt and your honesty as manipulation. No matter how calmly you explain yourself, their mind twists everything to reinforce their narrative. They don't want truth. They want control over their version of it. In this way, shadow projection becomes a subtle form of psychological warfare, where you are accused of crimes you didn't commit, blamed for emotions you didn't provoke, and misunderstood in ways that feel eerily calculated. The emotional charge behind these accusations is the third sign. Their reactions are explosive and entirely out of proportion to the situation. A minor disagreement becomes a full-blown betrayal. A simple boundary feels like an attack to them. This intensity is not strength. It is unhealed trauma lashing out, desperate to avoid the mirror of self-accountability. The fourth sign is the always the victim mindset. No matter how events unfold, they are perpetually wronged, misunderstood, and targeted. The cast of enemies is constantly rotating. One week, it's their friend, the next their colleague, and eventually, it becomes you. This shifting blame reveals the core of the shadow, an unwillingness to sit with personal pain and a compulsive need to assign that pain to others. As long as they're the victim, they never have to change. And what makes this cycle even more toxic is the fifth and final sign, subtle recruitment. they quietly begin to influence others, spinning a distorted story about you behind your back, laced with emotional manipulation and carefully chosen half-truths. They don't need to outright lie, just shape perception through implication, tone, and selective storytelling. It's psychological triangulation masked as concern, and it's how the shadow spreads its influence like smoke, blinding others before you even realize the fire has started. These signs aren't just patterns of human behavior. They are warnings from the soul that something deeply unconscious is leaking into conscious relationships. When intelligence becomes arrogance, when emotion becomes a weapon, and when victimhood becomes a performance, the danger is no longer psychological, it's spiritual. Recognizing shadow projection is not about blaming others. It's about protecting your energy, your truth, and your peace. Carl Jung didn't just give us theories, he gave us a spiritual compass. And if you listen closely, it always points back to the same place. Know yourself, own your shadow, or risk becoming it. 4. 6 stages of escalation. Carl Jung's deep understanding of human nature revealed a pattern so subtle, yet so dangerous, that it often goes unnoticed until it causes irreparable damage. He called it a psychological escalation, a slow, almost invisible descent that begins with a small, seemingly harmless misjudgment. At first, someone misunderstands you, perhaps unintentionally, perhaps due to their own unresolved pain. But instead of seeking clarity, they start to reshape their perception of you, not based on who you truly are, but based on the projection of their inner wounds. This is where the first crack in the mirror of truth forms, and if not addressed, it grows. That misjudgment evolves into a personal narrative. They begin to see you not through a lens of objectivity, but through a distorted image colored by their own insecurities, past traumas, or envy. Jung warned us that this isn't just psychological noise. It's a dangerous pattern, because once their inner story becomes their truth, it spreads. It's spoken to others. It's shared in whispers, in subtle shifts of tone, in quiet doubts planted like seeds. And these seeds grow in the minds of those around you, altering your reputation without you even knowing. People begin to look at you differently, respond to you with hidden suspicion, withdraw their warmth. Suddenly, you're no longer seen for your integrity or your heart. You're seen through the warped lens someone else crafted from fear. By the time this dynamic reaches its final stage, you find yourself isolated, misunderstood, or even excluded from the very spaces where you once belonged. And the most painful part is that none of it was based on your truth. It was built on another's projection of their shadow. In the language of spirituality, this is not just about social exclusion. It is spiritual warfare, carried out through unconscious minds. It's what happens when emotional immaturity meets unhealed pain, and the person weaponizes perception without even realizing it. This is why spiritual awakening isn't just about expanding love and light. It is about learning to recognize when the darkness isn't loud, it's silent, creeping, and cloaked in the illusion of rational concern. It starts as empathy, becomes suspicion, and ends as exile. Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And so instead, they project it. In modern life, you see this pattern in families where one person becomes the scapegoat, in workplaces where truth-tellers are isolated, in friendships where envy disguises itself as concern. Even in spiritual circles, those who carry light are often the ones most subtly targeted, because their presence activates what others haven't faced within. And so, if you are walking a spiritual path, understand this. Your awareness is your armor. Your discernment is your protection. Don't wait for dramatic betrayal to recognize danger. Watch for the shift in tone, the silence after your name is mentioned, the change in eyes that once admired you. Not all battles are fought with swords. Some are fought with stories. Some are fought in silence. And in this world, where reality can be rewritten with perception alone, the most spiritual thing you can do is see clearly, protect your energy, and step away when the mirror no longer reflects your soul, but someone else's shadow. 5. Additional dangerous states. Jung identified. Carl Jung identified some of the most dangerous psychological patterns not in the obviously aggressive or openly toxic people, but in those who appear spiritual, composed, and even wise. One of the most alarming states he uncovered is ego inflation, a condition where a person is completely convinced of their moral or spiritual superiority. These individuals don't necessarily come across as arrogant. In fact, they often speak with calm authority, using language that sounds enlightened. But their unwavering certainty is what makes them dangerous. When someone believes they are the embodiment of a divine or heroic archetype, they stop listening, stop questioning, and ultimately stop evolving. True spirituality is rooted in humility, not perfection. Jung warned that when a person identifies too deeply with a spiritual or righteous role, they become spiritually inflated, disconnected from reality, and unable to relate with the complexity of others' experiences. Another sign of hidden psychological danger is persona identification. This occurs when a person becomes so consumed by their carefully constructed public image that they repress all flaws, pain, and negative emotions. They wear the mask of perfection so tightly that they forget it's a mask at all. They may appear kind, composed, and generous, but beneath that surface lies a shadow self that has been buried for too long. Jung believed that when we become our persona, we're not growing, we're performing. Eventually, the suppressed parts of the psyche will demand release, and when they do, they often explode in destructive and shocking ways. This is why spiritual development is not about maintaining appearances, but about facing what we hide from ourselves. Archetypal possession is another dangerous state Jung warned about. This happens when a person becomes overtaken by a symbolic role like the savior, the victim, the martyr, or the righteous warrior. They don't speak as themselves anymore. They speak from the voice of a myth. They may say things like, "I've been chosen," or "I must suffer for the truth," not from self-awareness, but from a trance-like identification with a story that strips them of personal responsibility. This kind of possession feels powerful to the person experiencing it. It gives meaning and structure to their life, but it replaces genuine human connection with performance. Spirituality demands that we remain grounded, aware, and connected to our inner truth, not lost in archetypal theater. Finally, Jung described the trap of repetition compulsion, where someone unconsciously recreates the same toxic dynamics from their past again and again. These individuals often cast others into familiar roles from old trauma: the betrayer, the abandoner, the oppressor. They don't do this to manipulate. They do it because their wounds are driving their reality. If you're not aware, you can easily get pulled into their unresolved script. They repeat the same emotional cycles, not because they want pain, but because their inner child is trying to rewrite the ending. And if you let them, they'll turn your life into a stage for their trauma. This is why spiritual development is vital. It teaches us to see patterns, to step out of unconscious loops, and to choose healing over repetition. Jung's insights remind us that danger doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through charm, wisdom, or spiritual language. The people most consumed by shadow often look like they have it all together. So we must learn to read the energy behind the words, to ask whether someone is evolving or hiding, growing or controlling. Spirituality is not about how others perceive you. It's about how courageously you face your own shadow. And true spiritual development begins the moment you stop performing and start transforming. 6. How to protect yourself. When Carl Jung warned us about the dangers of psychological projection, he wasn't speaking from theory. He was speaking from spiritual wisdom, born out of deep observation. There is a silent violence that occurs when someone begins to see you not as you are, but as a reflection of the parts of themselves they cannot accept. They do not yell. They do not attack. Instead, they project. And in that subtle distortion, your identity becomes a canvas for their unconscious pain. This is why intelligence isn't just measured by knowledge, but by your ability to recognize what doesn't belong to you. The smartest form of protection begins with intuition. If something feels off, trust that. Your nervous system is often more honest than your reasoning mind. When the energy changes, believe the shift. When the tone becomes colder, or the praise suddenly feels transactional, you are no longer being seen. You are being used as a mirror for someone else's inner chaos. The most dangerous thing you can do at that moment is explain yourself. Do not debate. Do not argue. Because to someone deep in projection, your words don't land. They ricochet off their internal world and return to you twisted. Carl Jung knew that fighting illusions only entangles you in them. Spiritual awakening demands that you choose consciousness over conflict. Some people don't want clarity. They want control. And when they feel they're losing that control, they may wrap their shadow in charm or concern, all to keep you unsure of yourself. That's why setting boundaries isn't just emotional hygiene, it's spiritual survival. Keep your private life private. Your dreams, your fears, your past, these are sacred spaces that not everyone has earned the right to enter. The more you reveal to the wrong person, the more material they have to weaponize later. Protect your story by telling it only to those who can hold it with clean hands. Documentation becomes your anchor in moments when reality is being bent by someone else's narrative. Writing things down isn't petty, it's clarity. When someone tells you that something didn't happen, or that you're overreacting, or that you're too sensitive, your written truth will remind you that your perception is valid. Intelligence isn't just knowing what happened, it's knowing what to do with what happened. When repeated interactions leave you drained, anxious, or doubting yourself, pay attention. That's not just a bad day. That's a spiritual red flag. And if none of this works, withdraw. Not with vengeance, but with awareness. You don't owe anyone your continued presence if they only love you when you're easy to control. Jung taught that the most powerful act is not to fight someone's shadow, but to refuse to carry it. Distance is not always a punishment. It is sometimes the highest form of respect you can give yourself. Your energy is a temple. Your peace is a spiritual altar. And your boundaries are the walls that protect it. Let them be strong. Let them be clear. And let them remind you that spiritual intelligence isn't loud. It's knowing when silence, space, and self-trust are the only answers you need. 7. Jung's final warning. The most dangerous individuals are not those who scream or lash out, but those who project their inner darkness onto others while remaining completely unaware of their own shadow and utterly convinced of their righteousness. Carl Jung warned that this combination of total unconsciousness of one's shadow, coupled with complete certainty in perception, is not only psychologically dangerous, but spiritually corrosive. In spirituality and spiritual awakening, this is a crucial insight because it reveals how someone can carry hidden emotional poison while appearing externally calm, polite, or even virtuous. They wear a mask of normalcy, but behind it lies unprocessed guilt, suppressed rage, unresolved trauma. And when they see these rejected parts of themselves mirrored in you, they attack, reject, or criticize you without ever realizing they're reacting to their own inner wound. Jung called this projection, and it's one of the most destructive forces in human relationships, precisely because it hides behind false clarity. A person who refuses to confront their own inner darkness will subconsciously assign that darkness to you, making you responsible for the emotional burden they themselves are unwilling to carry. And the tragedy is, the more unaware they are of their shadow, the more convinced they become that their perception is truth. This phenomenon can be seen in families where one member becomes the black sheep, not because they are inherently flawed, but because they refuse to conform to the collective denial of truth. It appears in romantic relationships where one partner demonizes the other, not due to real harm, but because the other's strength, freedom, or sensitivity reflects back the aspects they've buried. It happens in the workplace, where someone becomes the scapegoat for team dysfunction, simply because they represent the truth no one wants to admit. Jung observed that people who cannot integrate their own shadow become blind to their own projections. They do not simply accuse, they believe, with unshakable confidence, that you are the villain, the liar, the manipulator, when in reality, they are disowning their own inner villainy, deceit, or control. This is not just psychological, it is deeply spiritual. Because true spiritual wisdom requires responsibility. It demands that you look inward before pointing outward, that you ask yourself whether what you see in others is actually a disowned part of yourself seeking recognition. But most people are terrified of this depth of self-honesty. They hide behind moral superiority or victimhood, and in doing so, they become dangerous without even realizing it. That's why Jung insisted that when you see this pattern, when someone begins projecting with total conviction and zero self-awareness, your safest response is withdrawal, not confrontation, not debate, not explanation. Because you are no longer interacting with the person, you are interacting with their unintegrated shadow, wearing the mask of certainty. And no amount of logic or love will awaken someone who is deeply committed to unconsciousness. Instead, your spiritual responsibility is to protect your peace, preserve your clarity, and refuse to carry what was never yours. This is the silent wisdom of awakening, to recognize when someone is not actually seeing you, but simply using you as a screen for their unresolved pain. The moment you stop playing the role they've unconsciously assigned to you, you interrupt the cycle and free yourself from the trap of projection. In this light, spiritual awakening is not just about love and light. It's about boundaries, discernment, and the courageous refusal to become someone else's emotional landfill. True inner peace comes when you no longer internalize the projections of the unaware and instead stand firm in the sacred knowing of who you are. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the warning signs Carl Jung believed could protect us from hidden psychological danger. If today's message resonated with you or opened your eyes to something you hadn't noticed before, let us know in the comments below. Your voice matters in this growing spiritual community. And if you found value in this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another insight that could shift your perception, protect your energy, and elevate your path. We're just getting started, and the next revelation might be the one that changes everything. Carl Jung, The Shocking Truth About Awakening Your Third Eye. As the ancient saying goes, when the eye is opened, the veil of illusion is lifted. In this video on spiritual wisdom, we'll uncover Carl Jung's shocking truth about awakening your third eye, a gateway not just to seeing the world differently, but to seeing yourself with radical clarity. The third eye is more than mysticism. It is a path to personal growth, self-discovery, and true happiness when you learn to apply its principles in your daily life. So let me ask you, have you ever felt like there's more hidden beneath the surface of what you see? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your perspective may inspire someone else's awakening. 1. What the third eye really is. The third eye is not a fantasy. It is a deeper form of perception that allows us to see beyond the surface of reality, beyond appearances, masks, and egoic illusions. In a world where most people are trained to look outward, to chase status, beauty, or validation, the third eye turns our gaze inward and reveals what's been hidden all along: the truth. When truly activated, it does not offer comfort. It offers clarity. Clarity so sharp, it cuts through denial, projection, and the roles we play. Carl Jung never used the term third eye, but he spoke of its essence. He described it as the gateway to the unconscious, the place where true self-awareness begins, and where all spiritual awakening takes root. For Jung, the unconscious wasn't a chaotic force to fear, but a deep reservoir of hidden truths, archetypes, and transformative power. It's the place that holds the shadow and the light, and only by facing both can we ever begin to see clearly. Opening the third eye means stepping into that territory, into the unfiltered self, and shedding illusions, even the ones we love. This is not a new concept. Ancient traditions across time and culture have pointed to this same inner vision. In Hinduism, the Ajna chakra located between the eyebrows is believed to be the center of intuition, insight, and spiritual guidance. In Buddhism, the path to enlightenment requires mindful seeing, the discipline to look past illusions of permanence and ego. In ancient Egypt, the eye of Horus symbolized divine vision, healing, and protection, offering insight that transcends physical sight. All of these traditions, in their own language, gesture toward the same truth: that beyond our two eyes is a higher form of sight, a sight that doesn't just observe, but understands. Not just sees people, but sees their pain, patterns, and projections. Not just sees events, but reads energy and meaning. And in today's world, flooded with distraction and shallow validation, this inner vision has never been more necessary. Yet most people fear it. Why? Because once your third eye opens, you can no longer pretend. You can't unsee the truth. You can't lie to yourself about who you are, who you've become, or who you've allowed into your life. It's no longer possible to blame the world for your wounds because you now see how you participated in them. You begin to notice how your fears shaped your relationships, how your insecurities picked your partners, and how your unresolved past wrote your present story. This is the price of spiritual awakening, awareness. But with awareness comes freedom. The freedom to rewrite, to heal, to choose differently, and to rise into a version of yourself that aligns with your soul instead of your survival patterns. And this freedom is the essence of true spirituality. Because spirituality isn't about escaping life, it's about finally being present for it. It's about seeing everything with eyes unclouded by ego, fear, or illusion. When the third eye opens, life changes not because the external world shifts, but because your perception does. You stop chasing what doesn't matter. You stop reacting to noise. You start discerning energy. You feel alignment instead of approval. You trust your intuition over trends. And suddenly, what once captivated you feels empty, and what once felt invisible, the quiet, the truth, the soul feels like everything. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The third eye is the bridge between the unconscious and the conscious. It's the light that shines into your hidden corners and brings choice where once there was only compulsion. This is not magic. It's mastery. It's the deepest act of remembering who you are beneath what you were taught to be. And in that remembering, you begin to see not with your eyes, but with your essence. That is vision. That is awakening. That is the silent revolution of the third eye. If you're ready to awaken your true inner vision, comment below. My third eye is opening to truth and wisdom. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and hit the bell so you never miss a new insight. 2. The science behind it, the pineal gland. The pineal gland, often referred to as the biological third eye, is more than just a sleep regulator. It is the gateway to spiritual awakening and higher states of awareness that most people go their entire lives without truly accessing. Deep within the brain, this tiny pine cone-shaped gland sits quietly, but when activated, it has the potential to open an entirely new dimension of perception, one that dissolves illusion and reveals the truth hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. While scientists acknowledge its role in producing melatonin, some researchers also suggest that the pineal gland may be responsible for producing DMT, known as the spirit molecule, a substance linked to profound mystical experiences, near-death states, and heightened spiritual clarity. These aren't just hallucinations or tricks of the mind. Many describe them as moments when the veil between the physical and spiritual world becomes transparent, allowing us to glimpse a deeper reality that the logical mind cannot comprehend. This is not fantasy, but a direct encounter with the inner world Carl Jung referred to when he spoke of the unconscious as a sacred reservoir of symbols, archetypes, and raw human potential that yearns to be integrated. What's remarkable is that you don't need to consume anything or escape your life to reach these states. Ancient spiritual traditions across cultures discovered natural ways to activate the pineal gland through intentional practices. Meditation pulls your awareness inward, creating space for inner silence to rise. Breathwork enhances your energy flow, oxygenates your brain, and begins to release blockages that keep your consciousness trapped in fear or repetition. Chanting sacred sounds like Om vibrates the cranial bones and directly stimulates the gland, while silence itself pure, uninterrupted stillness can become the most powerful practice of all, creating the internal spaciousness necessary for the third eye to awaken. These are not abstract rituals. They are spiritual technologies designed to elevate your perception, to make you more aware of the energetic and emotional layers shaping your decisions, your relationships, and your destiny. As you walk through life, this awakened inner eye allows you to see beyond appearances. You begin to sense the energy behind people's words, notice patterns in your experiences, and understand that every coincidence is a form of guidance. You no longer live on autopilot because you begin to observe the world not from your ego, but from your essence. Spirituality becomes a lived experience, not just a concept. And spiritual development, then, is the ongoing journey of refining that perception, cleansing it from fear, illusion, and conditioning, so that your choices become aligned with who you truly are beneath the roles you play. This process isn't about escaping reality. It's about seeing it clearly. It's about recognizing when something is energetically misaligned, when you're out of rhythm with your intuition, and when you're being called to shift. When your third eye is open, you're not just reacting to life, you're in dialogue with it. This clarity empowers you. It changes the way you speak, the way you move through challenges, the way you manifest what you need. You're no longer chasing life. You're magnetizing it through your presence. And this presence is what Carl Jung described in his exploration of the inner world, a state where we are no longer controlled by the unconscious, but consciously relating to it, working with its symbols, its dreams, its wounds, and its wisdom. The pineal gland becomes the torchlight that reveals what was hidden in the shadows. It brings the unconscious forward and offers you a choice to remain blind or learn to see with new eyes. In this way, spiritual awakening is not an escape. It is a homecoming, a return to the truth that was always within you, waiting to be remembered. 3. What happens when it opens? When your third eye begins to open, it doesn't ask for permission or prepare you gently. It disrupts you with truth. This is not a gentle nudge into spirituality, but a piercing awakening into intelligence that has long been buried beneath illusions. Suddenly, what once made sense no longer does. The job you chased, the relationships you clung to, the approval you desperately sought, all begin to dissolve under the weight of a deeper knowing. Carl Jung, though he didn't use the term third eye, understood this inner revolution. He referred to it as the gateway to the unconscious, the sacred threshold between the persona you perform and the truth you suppress. And once you cross it, you begin to see, not with your eyes, but with your spirit. You stop being fooled by masks. You see the patterns behind behavior, the archetypes beneath personality, and the energy behind every word unspoken. Your intuition sharpens to the point where it feels like you're no longer thinking, you're remembering. You walk into rooms and feel vibrations before anyone speaks. Dreams become symbolic instructions. Synchronicities increase. Solitude becomes healing instead of isolating, and silence starts speaking louder than words ever could. You detach emotionally, not because you've lost your capacity to love, but because your love is no longer desperate, no longer performative. It's rooted in clarity. You stop reacting. You begin responding from a place of presence and awareness. And yet, this clarity is not without cost. The opening of the third eye is often described as a gift, but what it really does is dismantle the false self. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This awakening is not about escaping the world, but finally facing it, starting with yourself. The illusions you once depended on start to shatter. The projections you believed about who you are begin to crumble. The ego, once inflated by validation and performance, starts to deflate in the face of spiritual wisdom. You're forced to confront your shadow, the hidden wounds, the unhealed traumas, the suppressed fears. The third eye doesn't just open you to light, it exposes your darkness, and in doing so, calls you to transmute it. You realize that the journey is not about becoming more spiritual in appearance, but about becoming more honest in essence. Intelligence, in this awakened state, is not about accumulating knowledge. It's about embodying truth. You begin to understand that awakening is demolition, not decoration. It tears down the walls you've built to survive, so that you can finally live. You may cry more. You may feel alone. You may even wish to go back, but you can't. Because once you've seen, you can't unsee. And that's the silent contract of awakening. The third eye doesn't just give you vision, it gives you responsibility. Responsibility to live aligned with what you now know, even when it's inconvenient. Responsibility to let go of relationships that no longer match your vibration. Responsibility to walk away from environments that drain your energy, no matter how familiar they once felt. You start to notice that people who once inspired you now confuse you. Conversations that once excited you now exhaust you. You long for depth, for meaning, for realness. And as this spiritual intelligence integrates, you stop trying to explain your evolution to those who haven't yet begun theirs. You realize that true awakening doesn't require external validation. It moves quietly, like a tide pulling you back to yourself. You become less reactive and more reflective. You listen more and speak less. You understand that energy speaks louder than language, and presence carries more weight than performance. The third eye sharpens your discernment and blurs your tolerance for anything that lacks truth. And perhaps the most shocking truth of all is that this awakening was never something you had to chase. It was always waiting inside you, dormant but alive, patient but persistent. It simply needed your permission to rise. If this insight into the third eye awakens something in you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep unlocking deeper spiritual wisdom together. 4. The dark side. Why many fear it. Most people resist the call of spiritual awakening, not because they don't crave truth, but because deep down, They sense that the truth will demand everything false to fall away. Awakening your third eye is not about gaining magical insight or floating into bliss. It's about seeing what you've spent your entire life trying to avoid. When the third eye begins to open, you don't just gain clarity, you lose illusions. And with every illusion that dies, a part of your old identity dies with it. This is why the path of awakening feels like grief. You grieve who you thought you were. You grieve the relationships that were built on unconscious need instead of true connection. You grieve the safety that ignorance once gave you. As Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. That's because facing the soul means facing the shadows, and shadows are rarely gentle. They hold the truth about our wounds, our denials, our false masks, and our silent suffering. Awakening strips away the distractions, forcing you to confront the void underneath the loneliness you numbed with noise, the fear you covered with control, the pain you buried beneath performance. But this stripping is not cruelty, it's cleansing. The pain is not punishment, it's purification. And the darkness is not the end, it's the womb of rebirth. The reason many people fear spiritual awakening is because it doesn't look holy in the beginning. It looks like breakdowns, detachment, anger, confusion, and loss. But these are not signs that you're doing something wrong. They are signs that your inner world is being rebuilt, that the structures of falsehood are crumbling, making space for truth. In this sacred collapse, you learn discernment. You begin to see the difference between love and attachment, purpose and performance, guidance and manipulation. You no longer allow others to gaslight your intuition or your truth. You no longer chase what doesn't feel aligned, and you no longer shrink to fit into spaces your spirit has outgrown. Spirituality, in its rawest form, is a commitment to wake up again and again, even when it would be easier to stay asleep. Spiritual awakening is not aesthetic, it is alchemical. It turns wounds into wisdom, solitude into sacredness, and clarity into power. The third eye doesn't just show you what's out there, it shows you what's inside. It reveals the emotional patterns you inherited, the roles you performed, and the unconscious beliefs that shaped your reality. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. That's the blessing and the burden. You are now responsible for your own consciousness. You can't pretend anymore. You can't fake connection. You can't tolerate energy that drains you. You begin to live in radical alignment with your intuition, your values, and your higher path. This inner vision makes you sovereign. It makes you spiritually intelligent. It teaches you to honor silence, protect your peace, and follow the wisdom within, even when the world doesn't understand. It is not a destination, it is a daily devotion. And the deeper you go, the more you realize that true vision was never about seeing more. It was about seeing clearly. 5. How to awaken the third eye, Jungian approach. To awaken the third eye through Carl Jung's lens is to embark on a sacred journey of self-confrontation, energetic alignment, and inner liberation. A journey that doesn't escape reality, but penetrates its deepest layers with courage and clarity. Meditation is the gateway, not in the modern sense of calming the mind for productivity, but in the ancient sense of observing without attachment. As you sit in stillness and watch your thoughts pass like clouds, you begin to realize you are not the storm, but the sky that holds it. This still witnessing creates space between your awareness and your mental noise, allowing your consciousness to stretch beyond habitual reactions and into the vast field of presence. Jung never used the phrase third eye, but he deeply understood the unconscious, the unseen dimension where truth, trauma, intuition, and transformation live. And in that space of stillness, you begin to touch it. From this stillness emerges the necessity of shadow work and journaling, not for self-pity, not to relive pain, but to reclaim the parts of you that have been buried alive under shame, fear, or conditioning. Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But you're not here to avoid. You're here to see." Through deep reflection and raw self-expression on the page, you begin to meet your rejected parts, your insecurities, your old wounds, your unmet needs, and as you name them, they lose their power to sabotage you from the dark. This process is not glamorous. It's not about becoming a spiritual person. It's about becoming whole. Your writing becomes a mirror, your honesty the scalpel that cuts through the mask of persona to reveal the soul beneath. And in that mirror, you stop running. You stand. Then breathwork becomes your sacred rhythm. Inhaling consciously and exhaling with intention, especially through practices like pranayama, you begin to activate dormant energies within the nervous system and stimulate the pineal gland, a small but powerful center in the brain associated with perception beyond the five senses. The pineal gland is not just a mystical concept. It is a real structure responsive to breath, vibration, and intention. As you breathe, your brain hemispheres begin to balance, your energy channels open, and you shift from survival mode into awakened presence. This breath is your power. It reminds you that every moment is an opportunity to return home to yourself. Chanting Om is not just a ritual, it's a recalibration of your entire being. Om is the original sound, the vibration of the universe before language, before thought. When you chant Om, you are not simply making a sound. You are tuning your nervous system, your spirit, and your consciousness to the frequency of all that is. The vibration travels through your chest, up through your throat, and into your head, subtly activating energy centers, calming the mind, and bringing you into resonance with something eternal. This resonance is not fantasy, it is felt. And when it aligns with breath, awareness, and self-honesty, something extraordinary begins to happen. The illusions fall away. You stop chasing and start seeing. But all of these techniques are nothing if you are not willing to face your true self with absolute honesty. This is the essence of Jung's teaching, that the path to illumination requires a descent into the self, not the curated, spiritualized version of you that seeks enlightenment as an escape, but the raw, honest, unfiltered truth of your being. The awakening of the third eye is not an escape from life. It is the ability to see life as it is without projection, without illusion, without the ego's filters. It's the moment you look in the mirror and recognize all your masks, and instead of clinging to them, you gently set them down. This moment is terrifying because it asks you to let go of everything false, but it is also the beginning of true freedom. To awaken the third eye is not to gain magical vision. It is to dissolve the blindness of self-deception. It is to embody presence so powerfully that nothing false can survive in your energy. Spirituality, when rooted in this level of depth, becomes a daily act of courage. Spiritual development is not measured by how peaceful you appear, but by how much truth you're willing to face. The third eye is a metaphor, a mechanism, and a mirror. It reveals not what is out there, but what is within. And when you truly see yourself, you can finally see the world. Do you feel ready to explore the Jungian path to awakening your third eye? Comment, "I agree," if this resonates with your journey, or "I don't think so," if you see it differently. Let's open the conversation below. 6. The transformation it brings. When the third eye awakens, it doesn't just change how you see the world, it changes the way the world responds to you. Everything begins to shimmer with a hidden meaning, as if life itself is revealing a deeper code beneath the surface of appearances. What once felt like mere coincidence suddenly carries divine orchestration, and you no longer chase meaning, it begins to find you. Synchronicities multiply, not because reality has changed, but because you finally tuned in to the frequency where truth lives. This shift in perception cuts through illusions and exposes the energy behind every encounter, every silence, and every shadow you used to run from. Carl Jung may not have used the language of mysticism, but his psychological wisdom pierced just as deep. His concept of individuation, becoming whole by integrating the light and shadow within, perfectly mirrors the spiritual intelligence of third eye awakening. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, Jung warned, but by making the darkness conscious. And so, this awakening doesn't just illuminate, it confronts. You begin to realize that clarity is not comfort. It's courage. It's the end of denial and the birth of spiritual vision. As you step deeper into this awakening, you begin to shed. First, the distractions, the endless scrolling, the shallow conversations, the people who only knew a version of you that needed their approval. Then come the shifts in energy. The silence that once felt like loneliness becomes a sanctuary, and the solitude you feared becomes your power source. You stop chasing noise and start listening to the whispers within. The old version of you begins to dissolve, not because it was bad, but because it was never whole. The friendships that once fit no longer feel aligned, and instead, you attract souls who see you without the mask, those who have walked the fire and recognize the spark in your eyes. Spiritual awakening demands a level of honesty that makes most people uncomfortable because it asks you to face the parts of yourself you've denied for years. But it is in that reckoning that you reclaim your power. Detachment becomes your sword, silence becomes your guide, and stillness becomes your teacher. You no longer need to explain your energy. You embody it. This transformation doesn't make life easier. It makes you stronger. You begin to realize that intelligence is not about knowing more, but about seeing deeper. Spiritual wisdom isn't found in books alone. It's carved through experience, shadow work, intuition, and surrender. The third eye isn't just a mystical idea. It's the lens of the soul that sees beyond duality. When you awaken it, you're not just accessing vision, you're accessing truth. This truth strips away the ego, peels back the persona, and leaves only what is real. You begin to live intentionally. You speak less, but say more. You walk away quicker, not out of bitterness, but because your energy has become too sacred for chaos. Your presence shifts rooms, not because you seek attention, but because you radiate alignment. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious holds the key to our transformation. And once that key turns, your life can never return to autopilot. You've seen behind the veil, and once you see, you cannot unsee. You either evolve or stay behind. But those who choose to walk this path will realize that the awakening of the third eye isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning of becoming who you truly are. 7. Permanent awakening and responsibility. Once the third eye opens, it never shuts again. And that's both the beauty and the burden of spiritual awakening. It is not a temporary insight or a fleeting mystical state. It is a permanent shift in consciousness, a continuous awareness that reshapes everything you know about reality. Suddenly, life is no longer something that happens to you. It becomes something that responds to you. Every interaction, every moment, every mirror reflects your internal state. The energy you carry becomes the blueprint for the world around you. And this isn't metaphorical. It's deeply psychological and vibrational. Carl Jung, who laid the foundation for so much of what we now call inner work, spoke about the unconscious mind as the true driver of our lives. To awaken the third eye is to make that unconscious conscious, to begin living from the truth of who you are rather than the conditioned identity you were told to be. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been beneath the noise, beneath the expectations, beneath the armor you built to survive a world that didn't yet see you. This awakening strips away illusion with surgical precision. You can no longer lie to yourself. You begin to see through manipulation, projection, and ego games, not just in others, but in yourself. And that's where the real responsibility begins. Because once you see, you are accountable. You're no longer allowed to play small, to pretend, to project blame onto others. Your spiritual awakening demands emotional maturity, radical honesty, and total alignment. This is not about supernatural powers or secret knowledge. It's about the quiet power of being fully present, fully real, and fully alive. You don't have to preach or prove anything to anyone. Your presence becomes your message. Your energy does the talking. You become a living mirror that reflects back truth to everyone you meet, not by force, but by simply being. In a world addicted to noise, your silence becomes loud. In a culture obsessed with image, your authenticity becomes magnetic. This path is not glamorous. It's not for performance. It's raw, humbling, and sometimes deeply uncomfortable. But it's also liberating. Because once the third eye opens, you can no longer be manipulated by false narratives, including your own. You begin to see how your thoughts shape your reality, how your fears attract lessons, and how your unresolved wounds call in mirrors to help you heal. This is the level of spiritual intelligence that Jung hinted at the power of self-awareness, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. You don't ascend out of life. You descend into the truth of it. Every challenge becomes a doorway to deeper knowing. Every heartbreak becomes an invitation to integrate the parts of you still waiting to be seen. And in this integration, you become whole, not perfect, but whole. Your light is no longer an idea. It becomes embodied. And you realize that the most revolutionary thing you can do in this world is to be exactly who you are without apology, without disguise, without shrinking. So when people ask what happens when the third eye opens, the answer is this: you stop pretending. You start living from the truth. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop waiting for permission and begin choosing presence. And in doing so, you become the kind of person who doesn't need to convince anyone of anything, because your energy speaks louder than words ever could. This is spirituality. This is awakening. This is what it means to be truly alive. Leave a like and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom if this awakens something within you. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss content that deepens your spiritual awakening. Type in the comments, "I deserve to live a financially prosperous life," if you're ready to align your responsibility with lasting abundance. And there you have it, the shocking truth about awakening your third eye, as seen through the lens of Carl Jung. This isn't just spiritual theory. It's a call to look deeper within yourself, to trust the inner eye that sees beyond illusions. If today's video opened your mind or stirred something within, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and spread this wisdom with others on the path. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an awakening insight. Your journey to higher consciousness is just beginning, and we're honored to walk it with you. What did this video awaken in you? Let us know in the comments below. See you in the next one.